In this video, we're going to go through Learning Target 6.2.1b, which is on solving for missing sides. And so we've previously done solving for missing angles. Now we're going to be solving for missing sides. And if at any point I am going too quickly through the notes, feel free to pause it so you can catch up and then continue on. First, I'm going to go through the steps for solving so that you have them in the very top of your notes so you know where to look whenever you are doing these on your own. The first few steps are going to sound familiar because they are the same whether we're setting up ratios or solving for missing angles. So step one is to circle the angle we are using. So we want to kind of orient ourselves in the triangle based on the angle we are using. And second, we are going to use that angle to label our O, our H, and our A. Next, we are going to choose sine, cosine, or tangent based on our given info. So remember, if we are only given O and H, we would want to use sine. If we're only given O and A, we would need to use tangent. Once you've determined which trig ratio you want to set up that trig ratio. So set up all the information that you have based on whether you are using sine, cosine, or tangent. And our last step is we are going to solve by cross multiplying. So that's where it's a little different than solving for missing angles. When we solve for missing angles, we need to use the inverse trig functions. And when we are solving for missing sides, we do not use the inverse. We are just going to be cross multiplying. And you'll see why when we set up a problem. So we're going to do two examples because there's two kind of ways for this to play out. So for this first one, let's draw our triangle. So we have our right triangle here, we have 19 here, x, and 40 degrees inside that angle. And our first step is going to be to circle the angle we are using. And in the case of missing angles, we were circling the one we didn't know. In the case of missing sides, since we don't know this side, we want to circle the angle that we do know because you can't have two unknowns. So we're going to circle the angle we do know. If you know both angles, so let's say this one was labeled 40 and this one was 50, you can choose whichever one you want. Doesn't matter. And based on this angle, we are going to label our O, H, and A. So H is always across from the right angle, so that would be here. O is always on the opposite side of our circled angle, so this is O. And then next to it would be A, but since we do not know this side length, I can't use A anyway, so I'm just not going to write it down. My next step is to choose sine, cosine, or tangent based on my given information. So remember, we want to use SOH CAH TOA to make our choice. And because this has O and H, we want to use the SO part, the sine. And so we're going to set up our ratio using our sine. So the sine of any angle is the opposite over the hypotenuse. So that's our format. And we're going to plug in what we know. So the sine of our angle, which is 40, and I kind of think of it as like it's in a bubble over here, so it goes inside the bubble here, is equal to O, which is x, over h, which is 19. And so once you have it plugged in, you are going to cross multiply. And since this side does not have a bottom, I'm going to put this over 1 so that I can easily see that these are multiplied and these are multiplied. So let's do the easy one first. X times 1 is just x. Then 19 times the sine of 40. 19 times the sine of 40. And it doesn't matter if 19 comes first or sine of 40 comes first. They're just numbers that we're going to end up multiplying. So now in the Google calculator, make sure you change the mode to degrees. I'm going to use my actual calculator, but you type it the exact same way. We just want to type this whole thing into our calculator. So 19 times the sine of 40. And we get 12.2 as our side length. So x equals 12.2. And that means this is the side length right here for my triangle. If you get a negative number, you probably forgot to change the Google calculator to degrees. That's the most common thing that would give you a negative. So just make sure you change it to degrees. So this is an example where our missing value is on the top of the fraction. And it's a little bit different if it ends up on the bottom. So let's see that one. In the second example, let's draw our picture. So we have something like this. We have 19 here, x here, and 74 degrees in that angle. So the first thing I want to do is circle my angle and label. So I'm going to circle my 74 degrees. Across from the right angle is my H. Across from my circled angle is O, but I don't have that one. And so this one is A. And if I have A and H, I want to use the cosine. So I'm going to set up my ratio. The cosine of 74 equals A over H. So 19 over X. And so again, I want to cross multiply. But when I do that, I end up with 19. And then the cosine of 74 times x. And so I can't type this in a calculator because this is where my variable is. So I need to get rid of the cosine of 74 somehow in order to solve it. And because these two things are being multiplied, I want to do the inverse and divide. The same way if you were doing like 19 equals 2x, you would divide both sides by 2. We're doing the same thing here, but dividing both sides by the cosine of 74. And so this part is what we're going to type into a calculator and see what we get. So we're going to do 19 divided by the cosine of 74, which gives me 68.9. And we're going to round all of these to one decimal place. So you're going to round to one decimal place because they will almost always be decimals. And on this side, my cosines cancel here, and I'm just left with x. So this is my answer. So when you set up your proportion, don't get in the habit of like, okay, I'm always going to multiply my trig ratio by this number. That's just not true. Sometimes you multiply, like in the first example, and sometimes you will divide, like in this one. I hope this helps.